The Dunkirk evacuations of 1940 and the Nazi powers hot on the heels of the British Army saw a swift and dedicated force of men and women set to protect their homes, their land and their freedom. The previously quiet, most southerly point of England, now full of might and hobnail boots, was preparing to protect its shores from the enemy. The Lizard Peninsula was clearly marked as a strategical landing zone at locations such as Kenwick Sands and Mullion. And with the increased importance of technology operating from the Downs and surrounding areas, it was vital to protect the Lizard at all cost. The anti-tank wall stretching out across the high tide mark of Kenwick Sands is a mere fragment of what it was when it was built in 1941. Today though, we can get a clear idea of how high and how difficult it would have been to manoeuvre tracked vehicles and even infantry over the wall into the surrounding countryside. Kenwick was not the only cove or beach that was protected by anti-tank walls on the Lizard, with Cadgwith, Porthowstock and Gunwallow all still having visible signs of tank traps or similar. It is not until you map out these locations that you can understand how easily it would have been to take RAF Drytree and Trelevene if these defences were not in place. Directly behind the beaches at Kenwick, it flattens out into an open pitch of rough ground, and less than 3 miles away from the coast sits the largest of these 3 chain home sites operating on the peninsula. But before the hostile forces could get to RAF Drytree and on, they would have to contend with not only 6-foot walls on the beaches, but anti-glider mounds and our light anti-aircraft batteries full of persistent servicemen. The British were very closely analysing the military strategies of the Third Reich's speed and efficiency as they swept through Europe in what they called the Blitzkrieg. It was in Belgium in 1940 where the Luftwaffe first used gliders to get their troops directly to the target. And it was from this experience that the British sought confidence that any invasion by enemy forces would include the precision landing of engineless aircraft designed to be used once to obtain the objective. The mounds of rock and soil we can see all over Goonhilly Downs today stand at 4 foot high and 5 foot across, all of which once housed a wooden or steel round pole suitable for taking the wings and fuselage out of an aircraft, causing the aircraft to change its trajectory and subsequently injuring the personnel inside. As a result, anti-glider trenches and mounds were constructed all over England on common land and open space, suitable to drop an elite invading force. Goonhilly's mound configuration is a bit erratic in places, but you can see in areas that the design was based on a predominant zigzag pattern, but with the occasional linear lines from east to west. And closely knitted into the downs under the cover of the nearby trees, you would have found a light anti-aircraft battery back in 1941. This position consisted of one gun emplacement, possibly a single 40mm Bofors gun, semi-submerged by a circular wall of corrugated iron and sandbags. So just over 100 metres to the south of the gun, accessible by a straight line path as visible on the 1946 aerial photographs, you would have found 2 Stanton shelters that would have been used to obtain cover if necessary. We usually expect to see Stanton shelters half buried in the ground like the ones found at St Neville and Davidstow Moor, but on this occasion the brick ends, although only one is still standing today, appears to be at ground level just like the ones found at RAF Winkley in Devon. The National Archives show evidence that 2779 anti-aircraft detachment was based at this location, with the intention of protecting Dry Tree and Treleveen on both sides at this point. At the start of World War II, the Air Ministry formed a secret department to oversee ways to fool the German Luftwaffe by the means of decoys and other ways of deception. Colonel Sir John Turner was placed in charge of this British decoy and deception scheme, and one of his plans was to mount lights on poles to simulate airfields a little distance away from the real location. The decoy site, or Q site as known now, simulated the flare path and landing lights of an operational airfield at night, in this case Predannack Airfield, which stood 3 miles to the south of here. The decoy was intended to deceive the German Luftwaffe into dropping bombs in open countryside rather than on the airfield itself. So still present today is the standard Q site shelter, built to the standard design of red brick and concrete. It features a blast wall to the rear and soil and earth on the roof for camouflage. All that remains today of the decoy station is this control bunker itself. It was constructed to protect the RAF operating crew from bomb blasts and shrapnel, and housed the generators needed to power the lighting system down the fake runway, which was spread out in the open fields to the south of this bunker. RAF Predannack became operational in May 1941, and almost immediately the Nazis had their eyes all over what they believed to be called Mullion Airport. By July 1942, and although Germany believed the site was incomplete, they had marked out the boundaries of the airfield, along with the key targets such as hangars, runways and ammunition sheds. Predannack was, for a satellite and backup airfield to RAF Portree from the north coast, still quite heavily protected. Predannack had no less than 8 20mm light anti-aircraft batteries around the airfield's perimeter, each self-sufficient with their own crew rooms and facilities. There is little left of the 1940s infrastructure on the airfield today, and there are even a couple of buildings earmarked for demolition in the near future, such as the lubricant store not far inside the front gates. The guardhouse and the gymnasium still stand to this day, not far from the main road, and although in deteriorating condition, the once bustling checkpoint that saw thousands of serving men and women pass through it can still be explored as it's been repurposed as an arts and crafts shop. Of course, each man and woman had to learn how to defend themselves from the enemy, and they had to be trained how to use their weapon of choice, and Soapy Cove, or Goo Grays as known locally, was the place they practiced their shooting skills. It was Sergeant Edwin Flower, or Eddie to his closest friends, but was responsible for finding a location and building the infrastructure of a small arms firing range, somewhere away from the public and somewhere spraying bullets on their Lee Enfields and Bren guns would not cause a nuisance. Set into the gravelly rock at the bottom of the valley is a 20-foot-long block wall built by Eddie and his colleagues to house the targets, which will be fired at from 2 elevated platforms further back up the valley. Many inert finds have been found here over the years, and some of them can still be found at the museum at Predannack. Just like RAF Snevel and Portreath on the north coast, and many other airfields around the country, there would always be at least 2 heavy anti-aircraft batteries protecting the airfields. And Meaver Battery, lost until recently, is one of the 2 that was there to protect Predannack. Operated by the Royal Artillery, Meaver is the later design from September 1943 and depicts a round or square gun pit where the magazines protrude into the centre of the pit. Meaver was not visible on the Luftwaffe's maps from July 1942, so it reinforces the knowledge that this was the 1943 pattern. All that is left today is some of the foundations of supporting buildings, but nature has reclaimed the site back to a pre-war state. The primary form of defence was Predannack Heavy Anti-Aircraft Battery on the northeast side of the airfield, and this does still stand proud and intact to this day. The Luftwaffe by 1942 had the battery identified as flak, and the date of this identification goes to show as the design of this battery is the 1941 earlier pattern. On the 1946 aerial mapping, you can just about make out a couple of Nissan huts on site as well, most probably a mechanical repair shop and guardhouse. The battery consists of 4 3.7-inch gun pits, which are still accessible on open days throughout the summer months. And the museum still has one of its 4 Vickers 3.7 anti-aircraft guns in situ, and is undergoing full restoration by the museum's team of volunteers. During its operational years, the gun would have been bolted down to the holdfast buried deep in the concrete to stop it moving around when fired. Within the gun pits, you will find 7 magazines and 2 crew rooms for the 12-man teams to brew up or keep warm during the winter months. And the 7 magazines would hold the rounds needed to protect the airfield from enemy aircraft. Among the museum's collection, they also have a large number of operational and unrestored Swedish 40mm Bofors guns, as well as British 25-pounders and Russian anti-aircraft guns. The nucleus of the battery, though, is the command post itself. This is where the guns would have been coordinated by the intelligence gathered on enemy aircraft by the plotters within. The command post consists of plotting rooms, offices and telephonists, all working together to calculate the enemy's location. The height and rangefinder located the enemy plane, whilst the predictor plotted the plane's flight path, enabling the gunners to set the fuses correctly and change the altitude of the guns before firing. If the guns are fired at the angle of elevation, then by the time the projectile reached the correct height, the plane would have long gone. It would take approximately 30 seconds for a shell fired from an artillery gun to reach 30,000 feet. Therefore, if the hostile target was travelling at 200 miles an hour, then the plane would have travelled 2 miles away from the original position by the time the shell exploded. So by using a height finder and predictor, the plotter could follow the plane the entire time it was in range, therefore predicting at what time, height and angle the guns would need to fire to meet the plane on its flight path. The RAF, Royal Artillery, Home Guard and even MI9 were actively present around the Lizard Coast during the war. And thankfully, other than training exercises on the sandy beaches by special operations, no other invasion ever came. Some people believe they were targets of the Third Reich though, as they always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And on the 26th of July 1944, not long after the Americans had left for the shores of Normandy, 2 adventurous boys became the victims of the Nazi powers when an unmarked mine on the beach of Cornwall took their lives.